The road to the Kentucky Derby heats up. This week we check in on the Risen Star and the Rachel Alexandra in the Swamp. We also go out west to the El Camino Real. All of this and more on The Future Book. The Future Book continues, and this week we take a look back at the Swamp races. We've got the Rachel Alexandra and the Risen Star. Now, the Rachel Alexandra ended up being a pretty exciting race at the finish line. Travel Column and Clairere had a rematch, and this was a good race from a tactical standpoint and how the trip played out for Clairere. It was Travel Column pretty much at even money and Clairere at right around 2-1 for the final odds. And most of the betting, Travel Column was the favorite, but Clairere took some late money, and Clairere had the rail. Travel Column had the 8th post position. She was able to get out and establish the pace, set some good fractions, and shook off a couple of challengers going into the turn. Now, Clairere had a much more eventful trip. She broke dead last, broke just a little bit inward, and that caused her just to pause, but she did save some ground. They stayed at the rail, then made a little bit of a move up the back stretch, was checked a couple of times, waited again for some room. Then as she entered the stretch, she had kind of inhaled the rest of that field except for the leader in Travel Column. And what happened was it looked like there was a little bit of an opening at the rail. The jockey started to go inside, and then all of a sudden he decided to elect and go out. So he kind of checked again and then went outside and then tagged off Travel Column in the final strides. An impressive effort off the bench for Clairere. She's definitely one of the top 10 Oaks contenders on that trail. A nice race for Travel Column off the bench. The long Louisiana Fairground stretch may have did her in, and she got just a little bit of a pressure early on, and that may have just softened her up enough late. We may see those two again in the Fairgrounds Oaks next month. Meanwhile, in the Risen Star, it was a rematch of the Lecompte Stakes. The top 3 finishers, it was Midnight Bourbon along with Mandaloun and Proxy. And the bettors got it right this time, even though the last time it was Midnight Bourbon going wire to wire. In that race, Mandaloun was 3 wide on both turns and just kind of flattened out a little bit down the lane. The race flow was all front running with a wire to wire victor for Midnight Bourbon. This time around, Justin Wright out of the 13 hole, he took the lead from that post, established some fractions, and that allowed Midnight Bourbon to have to chase just a little bit in that opening quarter mile, and he didn't get by with those soft fractions. The pace in the Lecompte Stakes were slow to both the 4 furlong call and the 6 furlong call, and in this race he got a little bit of a contested pace in that opening quarter, and then he chased a little bit going into the backstretch, chased the leader Justin Wright. Now, he tracked him nicely and he did settle good, but that may have just weakened him up enough, because when he took the lead going into the stretch, he was never able to actually establish a clear lead, because Mandaloun, who was right behind him the whole race, was able to make the move at the same time, and then through the course of the long stretch was able to wear him down. First time blinkers on for Mandaloun in this race, the son of Into Mischief. So he ran a nice race. And then Proxy, who the last time was a little bit closer to the pace, laid back. John Velasquez, a nice ride. This time they didn't hit him with that left-hand whip. He seems to drift out with that whip. This time they hit him right-handed. And he made a little bit of a move coming into the stretch. It looked like just after the turn he was going to try to maybe engage those leaders, but he kind of flattened out. There's talk that next time out that Proxy is going to wear some blinkers. And who knows, we may get a rematch of these 3, round 3 in the Louisiana Derby. Mandaloun, I'm not sure he wants 1.25 miles. I'm not really sure. Again, I'm not a big fan of that 1 3/16 Louisiana Derby. I just think that's too much to ask for these horses, and then to turn around and come back and run 1.25 miles. Normally you want that to be when the question is answered about the distance. And last year we saw Wells Bayou got hurt in that 1 3/16 race. I think it's just too much for a March race. Even these 1 1/8 races in mid-February, I think, is a little bit too much. So we'll see. 50 points for Mandaloun. Midnight Bourbon, I do think if he ever gets a soft lead, he can go a long ways. So, you know, I like him in a certain spot. Maybe the Louisiana Derby if Mandaloun doesn't go in that one. But these 3 are pretty much even, and blinkers on, blinkers off. pace, that's going to determine really the winner of those races. I don't like anybody else out of here. Senior Buscador got the class test. That running style doesn't work for longer races. He's more of a one-turn closing sprinter. Maybe a little bit for Obesos the next time if they want to keep him stretched out a little bit. And everybody else in this race, kind of really no excuse. Moving on to Golden Gate, it was Rombauer off the layoff, and he had scratched out of the Lewis a couple of weeks ago from a small field, and that may have been the right decision. Golden Gate, the poly, the synthetic place of the closers, 1.1 miles, a little bit more better distance for Rombauer. He's proven in his entire career he loves the distance, and this is the type of horse that he can go 1.25 miles. Got a lot of options, Sunland Park, maybe Santa Anita. Maybe if they want to try the Midwest, Bluegrass Stakes or something like that, I'd probably go to the Santa Anita Derby. I think if he can run in the top 3 there, that sets him up for the 1.25 mile Kentucky Derby. But Rombauer, definitely the pedigree, the running style, and just the way he rates and kind of goes on cue from the jockeys. He really seems to be more of an intelligent horse and really seems to rate in some of these races. Definitely not a speedball tendency type. So a nice race for Rombauer, 10 points on the Kentucky Derby trail. The speed figures are back. We got a 98 for Mandaloun from the Beyer boys, 85 for Clairere, and then an 84 for Rombauer. But again, those synthetic speed figures are usually not as accurate as the dirt speed figures. Another thing to note, early on there was talk that the Louisiana racetrack was a little bit speed biased. They ran that first race at noon. They ran the Risen Star at 6:15 Central Time, so that's a 6-hour difference. The racetrack may or may not have been speed biased early on, but it usually changes over the course of the day, and it seemed to be a pretty fair track. Clairere came from off the pace, and some other horses were able to do some damage later on in the card from off the pace, including a horse like Maxfield. So I'm not so sure it was a total front-running track. Of course, the Southwest Stakes with the cold weather got moved to this weekend. That's going to be this coming Sunday. We're going to have a preview race for that. Looks like we're going to get Keep Me in Mind along with Jackie's Warrior and Essential Quality. Round 3 of the Kentucky Derby future wagers, and the favorite was Life is Good at 7-1, 8-1 for Essential Quality, 9-1 for Greatest Honor. He was 43-1 in Pool 2, so definitely some value there if you got him in those odds. And the ones to watch coming up the race series, it looks like we've got the Southwest Stakes this Sunday, and then we come back for that Fountain of Youth and Devona Dale Stakes on 2/27. Then we go back to Tampa Bay on March 5th, and then March 5th also at Santa Anita. 6th, we're going to see the San Felipe, possibility of either Life is Good or Concert Tour from the Bob Baffert barn. So we're starting to heat up on the trail again. Getting close to 75 days away now from the first Saturday in May. That's going to do it for another edition of the Future Book. Remember, as D. Wayne Lucas always says, people have opinions, horses have the facts.